You ever feel like you're just drowning in information? You've got notes, textbooks, maybe chapter 13 staring back at you, and you just wish someone could cut through the noise, just, pull out the really important stuff, help you connect the dots, maybe even find a few surprises without having to wade through everything. Well, if that sounds familiar, you're definitely in the right place. Today, we are diving deep into alcohols. Yeah, that HOH functional group. Seems simple, maybe, but it's absolutely central to so much in organic chemistry. Our mission here is to really unpack Chapter 13 from Organic Chemistry as a Second Language. We want to extract those key nuggets, the big reactions, the mechanisms, how to actually solve problems step by step, maybe avoid some common mistakes, basically get you totally up to speed, fast, so you feel like you've truly mastered this stuff.
And they really are crucial, alcohols, I mean. They're incredibly versatile. You see them everywhere, as starting materials, as intermediates, getting a solid handle on alcohols. It's pretty much essential for understanding what comes next in organic chemistry.
Okay, let's get into it then. First up, what exactly is an alcohol? Seems basic, but let's nail it down.
It's simply an organic compound that has a hydroxyl group, that's the SOH, attached directly to a carbon atom.
Right, simple definition. But the book emphasizes classification, doesn't it? Primary, secondary, tertiary. Why is that so important?
It is really important. It's not just for naming conventions, though it helps there too. It tells you about the alpha carbon.
The alpha carbon being the one directly bonded to the OH.
Exactly that one. We classify the alcohol based on how many other carbon groups are attached to that specific alpha carbon. 1 other carbon, primary, 2, secondary, 3, tertiary.
And here's the kicker, right? This classification isn't just academic, it actually predicts how the alcohol behaves.
Absolutely. It fundamentally impacts its reactivity. We'll see this pop up again and again. Knowing if it's primary, secondary, or tertiary is often your first clue in figuring out what reaction might happen.
So like in exercise 13.1, they show, you look at the structure, find that alpha carbon, count the neighbors, boom, secondary. And that tells you something important.
Precisely. It guides your thinking right from the start.
Okay, structure down, let's shift to behavior. Solubility in water. We always hear hydrogen bonding. What's the real story there? Is it actually a bond?
Ah, good question. And the source is clear on this. No, it's not a true bond like a covalent bond. It's an intermolecular force, a strong attraction between molecules. Think of it like magnets clicking together temporarily. The DNA example is great, lots of weak attractions holding the strands, but they can still unzip. It's attraction, not a permanent link. Okay,
so it's an attraction, and alcohols have that OH group, so they can do this hydrogen bonding with water.
Exactly. That OH group is the hydrophilic part, the water-loving part. It makes alcohols attracted to water, but every alcohol also has a carbon chain, and that part is hydrophobic, water-hating.
So it's a balance, or maybe a battle.
Kind of, yeah. It's about which part wins out. For small alcohols, like methanol or ethanol, the OH group's influence is huge. They mix completely with water miscible. But as that carbon chain gets longer, think 1-butanol, or especially something like 1-octanol, that long, greasy, hydrophobic tail starts to dominate.
And it just doesn't want to mix with the water anymore.
Right. Solubility drops off. It might be partially soluble or hardly soluble at all.
Is there a quick way to guess?
Yeah.
Like a rule of thumb?
There is a very useful one. Generally, you need about 1 OH group for every, say, 5 carbon atoms to maintain good water solubility.
So like in exercise 13.6, a 7-carbon alcohol with 1 OH, probably low solubility.
Probably low, yes. But if you had a 7-carbon molecule with 2 OH groups, suddenly it's likely very soluble. It's a great shortcut for predictions.
Okay, solubility makes sense. What about acidity? Can alcohols act as acids? I mean, they have that H on the OH.
They can, yes. But to figure out how acidic something is, you always look at the stability of its conjugate base.
Which for an alcohol is.
Okay.
What happens when it loses that proton?
Exactly. You get an alkoxide ion that's an oxygen atom with a negative charge. Now, is that stable? Well, oxygen is pretty electronegative, so it's happier holding that negative charge than, say, nitrogen in an amine, but it's less happy than a halogen, like in HCl or HBr.
So where does that put typical alcohols on the acidity scale?
Generally, their pKa values hover around 15 to 18. Remember, lower pKa means more acidic, so they're much weaker acids than, say, carboxylic acids or even water.
But some alcohols are way more acidic than others, right?
Yeah.
What causes those big differences?
Right. And for that, we use the ARAO factors: atom, resonance, induction, orbital. It's your checklist for stability.
How does that apply here?
Well, induction plays a role. If you have electronegative atoms like halogens nearby, they can pull electron density away through the sigma bonds, helping to stabilize that negative charge on the oxygen and the alkoxide. That can lower the pK maybe down to around 14 or so, makes it a bit more acidic.
Okay, so induction helps a bit. What makes a huge difference?
Resonance. This is the big one. Compare phenol, that's an OH on a benzene ring, with cyclohexanol, just OH on a regular six-membered ring. Phenol has a pK of about 10. Cyclohexanol is way up at 18.
10 versus 18, that's
Yeah.
a massive difference, like orders of magnitude.
It's 100 million times more acidic. Why? Because when phenol loses its proton, that negative charge on the oxygen isn't stuck there. It can be delocalized, spread out through the entire aromatic ring via resonance structures.
Spreading the charge makes it way more stable.
Exactly. Cyclohexanol's conjugate base. That negative charge is stuck right on the oxygen. No resonance stabilization. This concept, resonance stabilization, is absolutely key in organic chemistry. Exercise 13.11 really drives this home when asking about the most acidic proton.
Okay, super important. Now, before we get into the new ways Chapter 13 introduces for making alcohols, let's quickly recap methods you might already know. What's in our existing toolkit?
Good idea. Yeah, from earlier chapters, you've likely seen SN2 reactions take an alkyl halide, hit it with hydroxide, like NaOH, and swap the halogen for an OH. We've also seen adding water across alkanese hydration. You can do acid-catalyzed hydration, H3O plus A, which follows Markovnikov's rule. The OH adds to the more substituted carbon.
Right, Markovnikov. But
Huh.
what if you want the opposite? The anti-Markovnikov product.
Then you need hydroboration oxidation. That sequence specifically adds the H and OH across the double bond in an anti-Markovnikov way. The OH goes to the less substituted carbon.
That's a key distinction. Hydroboration oxidation equals anti-Markovnikov addition of water. Got it. Any others?
Well, there's also SN1 with alkyl halides and water, usually for tertiary or secondary halides where a stable carbocation can form.
So several ways already. And as exercise 13.18 points out, if the goal is anti-Markovnikov, hydroboration oxidation is the immediate thought. That quick recall is vital.
Absolutely. Knowing the right tool for the specific transformation you want.
Okay, now for the new stuff in this chapter. Making alcohols via reduction. What does reduction even mean here? We need to talk oxidation states, don't we?
We do. An oxidation state is a bit different from formal charge. It's a bookkeeping method, really. We pretend all bonds are ionic and give the electrons to the more electronegative atom.
Okay, how does that help?
It lets us track electron density changes. Carbon's oxidation state can range from -4, like in methane, all the way up to +4, like in carbon dioxide. For an alcohol, the alpha carbon, the one holding the OH, has a specific oxidation state. For example, in exercise 13.23, they show a tertiary alcohol's alpha carbon is at an oxidation state of 0.
So how does this relate to making alcohols? What's being reduced?
Okay, so an oxidation reaction increases the oxidation state of a carbon. Think alcohol going to an aldehyde, or aldehyde to a carboxylic acid, or secondary alcohol to a ketone. A reduction does the opposite. It decreases the oxidation state. So if you start with a ketone or an aldehyde and you turn it into an alcohol, you have reduced that carbonyl carbon.
Okay. So reducing a ketone or aldehyde gives you an alcohol. How do we actually do that reduction?
We use reducing agents. These are chemicals that deliver the equivalent of H, a hydride ion. It's a hydrogen with 2 electrons and a negative charge, acting as a nucleophile. The two main ones you absolutely need to know are lithium aluminum hydride LiAlH₄ and sodium borohydride NaBH₄.
LiAlH₄ and NaBH₄. Are they interchangeable or are there differences?
Big differences in reactivity and how you use them. LiAlH₄ is much more reactive. Think of it as the heavy-duty powerhouse reducer. Aluminum is bigger, more polarizable than boron. Because it's so reactive, LiAlH₄ reacts violently, even explosively, with water or any proton source. So you must do the reaction in 2 separate steps. Step 1, add LiAlH₄. Step 2, then carefully add a proton source like water or dilute acid to protonate the oxygen.
Okay, LiAlH₄. Super strong, needs 2 steps. Keep water away until the end. What about NaBH₄?
NaBH₄ is much milder, more selective. Because it's less reactive, you can actually perform the reduction in the presence of a proton source, usually an alcohol solvent like methanol or ethanol. It's a one-pot reaction.
That's a really important practical difference. Safety and procedure. Exercise 13.30 highlights this, showing you need that second H2O step for LiAlH₄.
Critically important, yes. Use the wrong procedure, and at best, your reaction fails. At worst, it's dangerous.
All right, reduction gives us alcohols, but what if we want to make an alcohol and add more carbons to the molecule at the same time, build a bigger structure?
Uh-huh. Now we're talking about one of the most powerful reactions in organic synthesis, the Grignard reaction.
Grignard reagents. What are they and what do they do?
Instead of delivering H, like our reducing agents, a Grignard reagent delivers R. That's a carbon group with a negative charge character. You make it by reacting an alkyl or aryl halide, Rx, where X is bromine, chlorine, or iodine, with magnesium metal, usually in an ether solvent. Magnesium inserts itself into the CX bond, forming RMGX.
RMTX. And why is that useful?
Because magnesium is much less electronegative than carbon, so if the carbon attached to the Mg becomes electron-rich, it acts like it has a partial negative charge. It becomes a very potent nucleophile, a carbon nucleophile.
A carbon nucleophile, so it attacks things like carbonyls.
Exactly. It attacks the partially positive carbon of a ketone or an aldehyde. When it attacks, it forms a new carbon-carbon bond. And after you add a proton source, like in the LiAlH₄ reaction, you need a separate workup step, you end up with an alcohol.
But crucially, you've added that R group from the Grignard reagent. You've made the carbon skeleton bigger.
Precisely. It's a fundamental CC bond-forming reaction. If your target molecule needs more carbons than your starting material, you should immediately think, could a Grignard reaction do this?
So alongside alkylating alkynes, this is our main way to build carbon chains.
It's one of the absolute cornerstones of synthesis, yes. And exercise 13.37 shows a really common scenario. Often there's more than one way to combine a Grignard reagent and a carbonyl compound to make the same target alcohol. It gives you flexibility in planning a synthesis.
Wow, okay. So many ways to make alcohols now. Let's just quickly summarize the preparation methods we've covered.
Sure. We reviewed the old ways, SN2 on alkyl halides, hydration of alkanes, Markovnikov with acid, anti-Markovnikov with hydroboration oxidation, maybe some SN1. Then we added the new powerful methods from this chapter. Reduction of aldehydes and ketones using LiAlH₄ or NaBH₄. Remember the difference in reactivity and procedure. And the Grignard reaction using RMGX to attack aldehydes or ketones, forming a new CC bond and an alcohol.
And depending on which carbonyl you start with and which reducing agent or Grignard you use, you can specifically target primary, secondary, or tertiary alcohols.
Right.
Like exercise 13.52 implies you have choices.
Exactly. You choose the tool based on the final structure you want to build. It's like having a well-stocked synthetic toolbox now.
Fantastic. We know how to make them. Now, how do they react? What happens when we want to transform an alcohol into something else? You mentioned the OH is a bad leaving group.
That's the absolute key challenge. Hydroxide OH is a strong base, and strong bases are terrible leaving groups. It just doesn't want to leave on its own. So the first step in most alcohol reactions, besides acidity or oxidation, is to convert that OH into something else, something that is a good leaving group.
How do we do that? Let's say for elimination, making an alkene.
Okay, for elimination. If you have a tertiary, or usually a secondary alcohol, you can use strong acid, like concentrated sulfuric acid, and heat. The acid protonates the OH, turning it into AJOH2 plus water, which is excellent leaving group. It leaves, forming a carbocation intermediate. Then a base, like water or HSO4, removes a proton from an adjacent carbon, forming the double bond. That's an E1 mechanism.
E1 for secondary tertiary with strong acid and heat.
Yeah.
What about primary alcohols? Or if we want more control, like an E2 reaction?
For primary alcohols, E1 is difficult because primary carbocations are unstable. And if you want the predictability of an E2 reaction, like maybe getting the less substituted Hofmann product, you need a different strategy. You first convert the OH into a tosylate group. You react the alcohol with tosyl chloride, TSCl, in the presence of pyridine. This replaces the H of the OH with a T's group, making OTs.
OTs, tosylate, and that is a good leaving group.
Excellent leaving group, analogous to iodide. Once you have the alkyl tosylate, you can treat it with a strong, bulky base like potassium tertbutoxide, TBO, and you'll get a clean E2 elimination.
Okay, so two main paths for elimination. Acid-catalyzed E1, or make a tosylate then E2 with strong base. Now, what about substitution? Turning the OH into, say, a halogen?
Similar idea, got to make the OH leave. For tertiary alcohols, you can often just use concentrated HBr or HCl. The acid protonates the OH, make water, it leaves SN1, forms the carbocation, and the halide ion attacks.
SN1 again for tertiary. What about primary or secondary for substitute?
For primary and secondary, you generally want an SN2 pathway to avoid rearrangement and get better control. HBr works pretty well. Bromide is a good nucleophile. HCl is a bit trickier because chloride ion is less nucleophilic. So sometimes you need to add a Lewis acid catalyst like zinc chloride, ZnCl2, to help the OH group leave when using HCl.
Or could we use the tosylate trick again?
Absolutely. Make the alcohol into a tosylate, ROTs, and then just bring in your halide nucleophile like NaBH or NaCl for a clean SN2 reaction. This often gives better results, especially for secondary alcohols.
Seems versatile, that tosylate. Is there a more direct way to make an alkyl chloride?
There is a very convenient reagent, phenol chloride, SOCl2. Reacting an alcohol with SOCl2, usually with pyridine, directly converts it into the alkyl chloride, RaCl. The beauty here is that the byproducts are sulfur dioxide, SO2 gas, and HCl, which the pyridine neutralizes. The gas bubbles away, driving the reaction to completion according to Le Chatelier's principle. It's very efficient, as shown in exercise 13.57.
SOCl2 for chlorides. Nice. Okay, we covered elimination and substitution. What about the opposite of reduction? Oxidation.
Right. We can oxidize alcohols. What product you get depends on the type of alcohol and the oxidizing agent. If you oxidize a secondary alcohol, you always get a ketone. Doesn't matter how strong the oxidizing agent is, you stop at the ketone. Common reagents include chromic acid, often made in situ from sodium dichromate, Na2Cr2O7, and sulfuric acid, H2SO4.
Secondary alcohol to ketone, always. Got it. What about primary alcohols?
Primary alcohols are more interesting because they can be oxidized in two stages, first to an aldehyde, and then the aldehyde can be further oxidized to a carboxylic acid.
So we need control here.
Yes. If you use a strong oxidizing agent, like that same chromic acid, it won't stop at the aldehyde. It will oxidize the primary alcohol all the way to the carboxylic acid.
But what if you want to stop at the aldehyde? That's a really important intermediate.
Then you need a milder, more selective oxidizing agent. The classic reagent for this specific transformation, primary alcohol to aldehyde, is pyridinium chlorochromate, PCC.
PCC stops at the aldehyde. Chromic acid goes all the way to the carboxylic acid. That's a critical choice in synthesis, highlighted in exercise 13.62.
Absolutely critical for controlling the oxidation level.
Okay, one last reaction type from the chapter. Making ethers from alcohols. How's that done?
This involves turning the alcohol into its conjugate base first, the alkoxide ion we talked about with acidity.
Right, RO minus. How do you make that? You need a base.
You need a strong base, yes. Something stronger than hydroxide because the alkoxide is itself a strong base. Common choices are sodium hydride, NaH, or sodium amide, NaH₄, or even just elemental sodium metal. Using Na or NaAH is nice because they produce hydrogen gas, which bubbles off and drives the deprotonation to completion.
So, step one. Deprotonate the alcohol with a strong base like NaH to get the alkoxide, RO. What's step two?
Step 2 is an SN2 reaction. The alkoxide you just made is a great nucleophile. You react it with an alkyl halide, RX. The alkoxide attacks the alkyl halide, kicks out the halide leaving group, and forms an ether, ROR. This whole two-step sequence deprotonation, then SN2, is called the Williamson Ether Synthesis.
Williamson Ether Synthesis. Sounds useful. Any pitfalls, any tips, like from exercise 13.69?
The major pitfall comes from the SN2 step. Remember, SN2 reactions work best with primary alkyl halides. Maybe okay with secondary, but they generally fail with tertiary alkyl.
Why fail?
Because the alkoxide is also a strong base. If you try to react it with a tertiary or even a bulky secondary alkyl halide, you'll get mostly elimination E2 instead of the substitution SN2 you wanted. You'll make an alkene, not your ether.
So for Williamson to work well, you generally want the alkyl halide part to be primary or methyl.
That's the key planning consideration for a successful Williamson ether synthesis. Choose your ROH and RX combination wisely.
Wow. Okay, we have really covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
From just defining alcohols and their properties like solubility and acidity.
All the way through a whole range of methods to prepare them, reviewing old ones, adding reduction and Grignard reactions.
And then exploring how they react, overcoming that bad leaving group issue to do substitutions and eliminations, controlling oxidation, and even building ethers. It's a huge chapter.
It really is foundational. You've gained tools now to analyze structures, predict properties, and plan synthetic steps involving one of the most common functional groups. Understanding primary, secondary, tertiary, knowing LiAlH₄ versus NaBH₄, recognizing when Grignard is needed, these are powerful concepts.
So think about this as you go forward. How does knowing these details, like the subtle difference between PCC and chromic acid, or the CC bond power of Grignard, change how you might tackle your next synthesis problem or mechanism question?
Because mastering this isn't just memorizing reactions. It's about seeing the logic, understanding why things happen, and knowing which strategy fits which situation. That's when you really start to feel confident in organic chemistry.
We really hope this deep dive has sparked some connections for you, maybe cleared up some confusion, and given you a solid handle on alcohols. Keep digging, keep asking questions, And thanks so much for joining us and being part of our deep dive community.